Hello, Cape Crusaders. Please join me in welcoming a very special guest to our show. He's the director of 16 episodes of Batman the Animated Series, as well as the sequence director for Mask of the Phantasm, plus directing credits for Gargoyles, Todd McFarlane's Spawn, Men in Black the Animated Series, X-Men Evolution, and 38 episodes of Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Please welcome to the show, Frank Paur. Frank, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Oh, thanks for coming on. Will is here as well, as always.
Hello, everybody. I'm also here.
So, Frank, thanks for coming on, man. It's a real pleasure to speak to you. For all of our listeners out there, you directed 16 episodes of Batman, which were Be a Clown, I've Got Batman in My Basement, Vendetta, Prophecy of Doom, Mad as a Hatter, The Cape and Cowl Conspiracy, The Underdwellers, The Strange Secret of Bruce Wayne, Tiger, Birds of a Feather, Shadow of the Bat Parts 1 and 2, The Warrior Men, Paging the Crime Doctor, The Terrible Trio, and Bullet for Bullock. Whew, that was a lot.
God, was that the one with the children? No, that's the Underdweller.
That was your first episode that you directed
Yes,
for this show. Yeah.
There's a lot of irony now in the story and directing departments on that one.
Look, you know, it gets it must have been challenging because obviously it's a very different episode from most of the show, especially being your first episode. It gets a lot of flack, but we just reviewed it recently and we think it's really good because it's kind of an insight into Bruce cares so much about these orphan children that, you know, he goes the extra mile and even brings one into Wayne Manor. So we really liked that aspect. And why don't we just kick off in asking you, what was it like on the show directing and being a sequence director for the show as well? Like, what was the process like for you?
Well, we'd always have our discussions about the show, you know, Eric and Bruce. We wanted to do something different, and a lot of us came in from the Marvel G.I. Joe, Inhumanoids, stuff like that. And so that was different kind of storytelling because that was very fast paced. You know, you would cut the scenes together very fast because you would never get very good animation out of any of that stuff. And it's like when you watch X-Men the animated series, it cuts really fast all the time. Right. And there's not a lot of time to let character bits play out. And so we're trying to unload a lot of that baggage and get more into actual cinematic storytelling. Right. Not just visuals, but you know, it's like we need to give a character time to just go and see his expression during that little thing, because those are very important in Batman. A lot of these stories were very reflective of personalities. You know, we were reestablishing all of the villainy, all the villains. It's like you could say the writers reinvented them all from, you know, the goofy, corny kind of things, and we gave them all depth. And so there was a lot of I know, at least for me, I mean, someone like Kevin Altieri, he just came out, you know, hitting a home run with Man-Bat.
Right,
you know,
yeah.
And others, you know, I mean, some of these shows are fairly complex, and we're trying, you know, I mentioned the Underdwellers. There's a lot of mistakes on that, you know, it's one of those shows, and there are several shows within this that I wish I could go back and redo. Because I know so much more now than I did then. Underdwellers was very much about, you know, it was Oliver, it was Fagin company. Yeah. I would say even an evil Fagin, more so than was in, you know, Oliver. But there's a lot of things I would dearly love to have done, you know, with the kids and things that I know now. But back then, we were still kind of experimenting.
Well, you know what, like, I think it's pretty amazing because even though you were experimenting and you look back on it now, there are so many episodes in the list of episodes that you've done that are some of my absolute favorites, like The Strange Secret of Bruce Wayne, which is all about Hugo Strange, you know, and developing this machine to read Batman's mind. And you've got the Joker and Two-Face and Penguin in there. It's just a fantastic episode. And storyboarded and told really well. Like it's just one of those episodes that has my attention the moment I look at it. And I suppose I was thinking today, because I watched it again today, because I really like it in preparation for chatting with you, just looking at, how you storyboarded and how you placed your shots. With that whole process, what was it like taking Bruce Timm's character concepts and turning them into animated figures?
Well, it was a lot simple. It was a lot more simple than drawing the X-Men. I did a few of those X-Men. I storyboarded a few of those X-Men things at some point. But Bruce's designs, I mean, he was going back to cleaner lines, simpler shapes, something that I tried to not copy but emulate when I went on to Gargoyles. We had that, they're very different designs,
Mm.
but they had the same animation philosophy behind them. The simpler it is to draw, the better it is for the animator to do these things.
Right.
That's what Batman was all about. Alex Toth was a big inspiration, as well as the original Superman. I would
Yeah.
say, even the old Hercules series, there's influence in that as well. But those designs are very, very simple, and these were designed by master animators. Back in the early days of TV, when TV was just being, coming out. And he went back to that and he made it his own. He created a design that has held up over all these years. So when you're boarding and you're doing that, it's trying to get the clear shots. It's trying to do, you do your setups. You got these beautiful characters. You also can't just think about it's the characters, because oftentimes the background are just as important as the characters in these pieces. When you look at anime, for instance, oftentimes you don't have a chance. They don't have the budget for a lot of heavy animation. They reserve all the heavy animation for the battle, for the fighting stuff. But sometimes they'll just have this big, beautiful, long scene, a lot of talking, just these little characters that aren't really animating, maybe a little slide here and a little slide there for ambience, and it gives it personality. So we would look at stuff like that, and we'd look at old, at a lot of film noir movies. We'd look at Orson Welles movies for the setups.
Do you remember particularly the specific anime that you were looking at all, or any of those?
Back then, there are so many. Everybody goes with Miyazaki. Everybody was on Miyazaki kick back then. They still are, but there are other things. When we were doing GI Joe, we used to look at Macross all the time because of all the fighter aircraft and setups and things. And since it wasn't being done in Korea, it was being done in Japan. When we were doing all the old GI Joe stuff, they have a different system of a different camera system than, say, having it done in Korea. The American influence on the Korean is that, we'd have a flatbed and we plant the image down, it'd be on the pegs, and it was very simple up, down, left to right, right to left sort of thing. So the camera moves are very simplified. Whereas when you go to the Japanese, they didn't clamp things down the way the American system did. They just kind of almost winged it. So when you look at a lot of these early Robotech would have been called, and you look at that and you see all these sweeping angles, they would rotate and move like they were alive. That's because they didn't have the system where you clamp the cells down to the platen on the animation camera. And so they were able to get all these sweeping kind of things. And because of that, we had a lot of studios overseas. We had a lot of them in Japan. We had a lot of them in Korea. It's like knowing which studio could do what.
Yeah, what was that like working with multiple studios? And
you had to know the studios. I mean, we had great studios, and we had some that were not so great.
Yeah, I know that ACOM was one that was not so great, that even got fired.
Yeah, they had issues.
Yeah,
everybody had issues with ACOM, but during that time, it wasn't just about the studio itself. It was about how they did things. I was talking about the camera, the technical things of that. They very much worked on an American system of doing things. And so at that time, we were doing a lot of the layouts ourselves in studio. And you had to know a lot of tricks about timing. And there's everybody had experience in doing layouts themselves. I had a lot of experience. Boyd Kirkland was pretty much an expert on everything. But I had a lot of those ACOM episodes.
Right.
Because, I maybe it was unintentional, I don't know. But
what, stick Frank with the bad animation studio?
Well, it wasn't that simple. It was really, you get scripts, and sometimes you're looking at a script that's going to go to one of the Japanese studios, and you look at a script that's going to go to the Korean studio, and you got to figure out which one do you want to come out looking better.
Right.
Which is a better story. So decisions were made. Well, who knows layout more?
So was it already kind of determined before there was even any animation done what episodes were going to perform better, or at least what they thought?
Well, it's hard to say, because we would have some storyboards that were just amazing, and they come back, and even from some of the Japanese studios, they come back looking like crap.
Right.
Bruce and Eric, they would always try to figure out which was going to be the best thing. And I look at it and I go, gosh, I got another ACOM episode. I'm going to spend a lot of time in working on the layouts to make it
crystal clear.
Well, it's not just ACOM. It was like Dong Yang and a few others. And so, they weren't always bad episodes either. And when you get those, because I think I knew a lot more, with the exception of Boy, about layouts. I got a number of those shows. So I would be doing the storyboards, and I'd be going over the layouts. When you do the layouts, you have to work out the timing of the pans and try to do all these different types of things. And they would, sometimes a show that was crap, I think Bruce had mentioned at one time that Mad as a Hatter,
yeah, that's one of your episodes, right?
One of the others that he didn't think it was going to come back looking as good as it did. And well, it came back looking as good as it did because he put a lot of work in the layouts on that thing. And so a lot of the work was done by us here, that the overseas, they understood immediately what we wanted. There was no guesswork to them. And so it came back looking better than what their reputation, had said, so.
Right.
Depend on what we gave them, honestly. The better work that we would give some people, the better it would turn out. So it's not just like this is just a bad studio or not. We had to do our part as well.
It's like the comic industry. I always draw better and write better when the story is better. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Thing, though. We had some good writers. I worked a lot with Michael Reeves and Paul Dini and that. And you mentioned Randy Rogel. Those guys are fantastic writers. I loved working with all of them because their stories were so easy to go through, to just visualize.
Yeah, I think that's why this show just still stands the test of time, because when you've got a really good-looking show with really good storytelling, it's just going to continue to. I know there's generations. I don't know if you've experienced this, but obviously, we were the kids when this show came out. We were the target audience, but now our generation is giving it and showing it to the next generation, to their kids, and it's just continuing on from there. And I don't know if you've experienced that yet, but kids now still watch that show and it doesn't look dated or anything. They're like, this is awesome. This is Batman. I've never seen this. This is great.
Well, again, we were reinventing. We were treating it more like mini movies.
Yeah.
Than a cartoon.
Well, let's talk about movies for a second, because you were the sequence director on Mask of the Phantasm, the first animated film for Batman the Animated Series, which originally was supposed to be only a on VHS release, but then changed to being released in theaters on Christmas Day.
It was a very limited release.
Yeah.
We didn't have the kind of budget you would like for a theatrical. Maybe it was pumped up a little more, but it was a TV budget.
Is it true that since it was originally supposed to be for more of a television VHS format. The moment it got pushed for theaters, it didn't have to be drawn on bigger cells or something like that, or it was something to do with the
Aspect
Oh,
ratio?
aspect
yeah.
ratio.
The aspect ratio, and also depending on how it was done, on how the studios were. I can't remember the studio that was animating it, so I don't know the specifics. Eric Radomski, he was the guy that he was honestly, he was the true hero of that series, because he understood a lot of the technical, and he would deal with overseas a great deal. And whereas Bruce would get really much involved in the creative, it was always Eric that got the show pushed out,
Right.
got it done, and soothed egos, was doing all that sort of thing. So he's kind of the unsung heroes.
Yeah, because Mask of the Phantasm has multiple directors and multiple writers on it, doesn't it? So I assume they probably gave you multiple sequences for you to storyboard and do.
I can only remember one. Yeah, they did. I can't remember all the sequences, quite honestly. I remember the graveyard sequence, and I
Oh,
remember
was that you who did the graveyard sequence?
I didn't storyboard that.
Okay.
That was Ronnie Del Carmen.
Okay.
Now, you know Ronnie?
I've heard that name before, yeah, but please remind me. Thank you.
He's a big story director at Pixar these days.
Right.
Part of our arsenal. Every now and then you get these guys. It's like Jeff Snow is a big Disney feature guy now. Ronnie is a big guy at Pixar. I mean, we would have some of the most fantastic storytellers, and honestly, Ronnie was just, he outshone most of the directors. He was just that good. But I had him working, Bruce had him working with me, and he did that graveyard sequence. And the thing that made Ronnie so good is he is able to capture the emotion of a scene.
Mm. Right. Is this the graveyard sequence where Bruce is begging his parents at the grave, or is it the one where the phantasm is chasing the mafia guy and puts him in a hole? You may not remember, but
it's the one with the parents.
I don't know if you know this, but that's hailed as one of the best Batman scenes of all time, not just animation, but of live action.
Again, I'd have to give a lot of, I can't claim credit for that. I'd have to give that credit to Ronnie.
Okay.
Well, what's some of the most like the proudest things that you've contributed to Batman the Animated Series? Something that you feel like you really put your thumb on it as you and made it a part of it.
I always liked the Batgirl episodes.
Yeah.
I always liked the Batgirl episodes, particularly the second one was full of action. Had a few issues with it. There's a few continuity issues I had with it I didn't like. The first one was all set up, but the setup on that was very nice, that we were able to kind of get in there. And, I think that was it Malone? He would do these disguises, and he would actually be doing some detective work, and everything was being set up with of course, Barbara Gordon and his Batgirl. And it was all set up, but it just all seemed to click together for me. It had a sense of mystery about it that all paid off in the second episode, in the second part 2, which was a headache to deal with.
What? Because of all of the action?
For logistic reasons, because a lot of the action was very, sometimes things have a tendency to get a little too convoluted on the screen, and we have to sit back and we have to try to simplify things somewhat.
Right, I gotcha.
But I think as a whole, those two came together fairly well. As far as saying, well, I did this and changed the course of the series, I can't say that.
No, absolutely not. It was
but just something you're proud of that you contributed to.
There are shows that I'm very proud of, and there are shows that I'm not.
Well, I really like a lot of Earth's Mightiest Heroes. That was a late find for me, but I really loved that show.
It was old time Marvel before Marvel. That was like a love letter to 1960s Marvel.
Well, it just worked. Like, it should be used for a track record of how to do villains successful in team scenarios, because all of those villains and all of those team ups to fight the villains was exciting and fun, and it felt new, even though it felt old. If you know what I'm
Well,
saying.
it's in animation these days, I think there's a lot of, and maybe you've noticed it as an as an artist, that comic books seem to have a tendency to get very wordy.
Hmm.
And these days, and it's the same thing for animation. You have to try to find a balance. When I say that, it's like a love letter to the 1960s. I mean, I grew up on 60s comic books, Marvel comic books predominantly.
Right.
Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Roy Thomas, Neil Adams, those guys. And there was just a pattern that they were able to do as a formula. It was all action, but it had the emotion, and it had the pathos, it had everything you wanted, and it was this glorious mix of madness that they were able to put out, and that's what we all became and fell in love with as children.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I mean, I was in my early 20s when that came out, and my brother, this is when he lived in the UK and I lived in the States still, and he messaged me saying, "You really got to check out this Avengers show." And not that I had anything against cartoons in my 20s, but obviously I'm thinking it's probably not directed at me anymore. And I remember watching a couple episodes and I'm like, not only is this not talking to children, but these are really good episodes, like great storytelling, great character development, as well said, like epic team ups and telling the stories of the villains in a really great way. And yeah, I watched the shit out of it, man. I loved that show. It was great.
I wish they would have kept it going, but
Yeah.
I agree. I thought the show that followed it was, I didn't understand why take something that was so good and then just produce something that's so mediocre.
well,
It just
well, at that time, Disney purchased Marvel,
right.
which I think was one of the worst decisions that Marvel ever made, is allowing themselves to be bought by Disney, and for a number of reasons that I won't get into. Earth's Mightiest Heroes was not a Disney product.
Right.
It was there before. It was made by people. I mean, we all had Marvel input, but when Disney took over, there was even more input that they came in. And I think one of those things is, we've got live action movies. The animation should look like live action movies.
Right.
That's genius. Let's do that. And they changed the style and the simplicity, and they cheapened the budget and made it more difficult to draw and to animate. That's why I don't like super realistic designs. I think they're a bad idea for cheap animation unless you don't plan to animate anything.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I
We
think
were just chatting with Randy Rigel, as I said, and he was talking about how the Sub-Zero movie, which he was writing the second Batman film, was originally Bane was the main villain of that. But then Warner Brothers called them in and were like, okay, well, we got Batman and Robin coming out, and Arnold Schwarzenegger has just been cast as Mr. Freeze. So Mr. Freeze is your main villain now, and they changed absolutely everything. And it worked, the film was still great.
do the voice on Mr. Freeze.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because Randy, because he worked a lot with Boyd Kirkland, who I considered the best director out of all of the Batman directors, was Boyd.
Right.
He did that movie. But yeah, these you have to look at these things, these programs, and you have to be very conscious of how you make them, of the cost and of the design, and you have to put all these pieces together and figure out the best way for the best product. They had a lot of amazing talent on the follow-up to Avengers: Earth's Mightiest Heroes, but I think the designs were a poor choice because if you look at it, the animation is very inconsistent. The quality of the art is all over the place, and that's because the designs are too realistic, and there's just not enough quality artists to do that kind of level of design work and keep it consistent. And to keep it animated is even harder to deal with. Going back to Bruce's original thing, less is better when you animate. And Disney executives don't understand that.
So I've heard some story ideas for Batman that just never made it to air. I don't know if you remember, maybe you don't, but were there any episodes that you ever were conceiving or starting to work on that just never made it to air?
None for me.
Okay.
I don't recall. I know. Because if there are things that were going to happen, toward the end of my time at Warner Brothers, I was being courted by Disney, and I was even being courted by Marvel to do the Spider-Man series.
Oh, right. What, Spider-Man the animated series?
Yes.
Oh,
Love it.
that's so we. I didn't mention this up top. We did that series as a podcast before we started Batman. So we
Yeah, for
chatted.
years.
Yeah, we chatted with loads of writers and directors and voice artists from that, and it's a great show, man.
Oh well, they had. Bob Richardson is a friend. I've known Bob ever since my early days at Marvel Studios
Right.
I think he was doing Muppet Babies at the time and racking up his role of Emmys. But I've known Bob for a long time. He did a fantastic job on
He
it.
did, yeah.
Do you remember anything about the courtship of Marvel and potentially with you doing Spider-Man?
Well, it was, let's say, not Marvel per se, but it was Graz Entertainment was looking at possibly doing it, I believe. And they were looking for a producer that they could pitch to Marvel on it. And I was being courted by Disney at the time. When you get a character like Spider-Man, everybody's going to jump in on it.
Right.
And that's not always a good thing because everybody wants to be the boss. And if you're the low guy on the totem pole, but are still in charge of getting it done, it's going to make life very difficult for a few years. And then I'm offered this odd offbeat property by Disney about a group of gargoyles flying around New York City.